Hey, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to talk about my favorite reads of 2024. This is one of my favorite videos to film because I get to reflect on the best books I read throughout the year. So there are 10 books on my list, and I didn't put them in any particular order other than I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read them throughout the year. So, ones that went all the way back to last winter to all the way to the end of the year in December. So let's dive in. So before I get started, I do have a special guest today. This is Pogo. We are dog sitting him for Austin's aunt, and he's been here all week. He's actually going home tomorrow, but he is a very cuddly boy, and he loves to be in somebody's lap. So he wants to be in the video today, so he's going to join me. Okay, so the first favorite that I want to talk about, I read back in February, and it wasn't quite a 5-star read. It was a 4.75, so it was close. It was close, and it's the only one on this list that was not a 5-star. But the book was Poor Dear by Claire Oshetsky. And the reason I really loved this book was it just ticked a lot of boxes for me. It has a coming of age element to it. I loved the writing. It was so dark, but it was also very beautiful. And it's a very sad, heavy book. So kind of know that going in. It talks a lot about grief and guilt, but it does so through the eyes of a child, because our main character is a child. And so it kind of just tackles those heavier themes through a child's perspective. And I just thought it was very powerful. Like I said, very sad, very dark, but it kind of stuck with me. I don't know what it was that I couldn't quite give it 5 stars, but it came close, and that's why it's here in my favorites video. My next favorite I also read in February of 2024, and I read The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. This was my first 5-star read of the year, and it was quite a chunky book, but I loved this book. I listened to it on audio, and again, it had things that just tend to be my favorite. It's a coming of age story, and we meet our main character, Ailey, when she is, I think she was about 4 years old, preschool aged, and it takes you all the way through her college years. So you're with this character for a long time. You really get to know her. You really get to know her family. It even goes back into the past and gives you insight into her ancestry and things like that. And I just loved this. I loved her family. I loved the journey that she was on. I loved how it just tackled all the sort of coming of age themes, how you're trying to find yourself, and then, the family themes about, family expectations and things like that. This had so much going on. I loved this, and I'm so glad that I read it. My next favorite of 2024 I read in March, and it was Stephen King's nonfiction book on writing, and that's basically what it is. It's a book where he talks about his beginnings as a writer, how he came to be a writer, and then offers sort of tips and tricks on how he kind of does his thing, and he's good at it, right? So I really liked this because Stephen King, just as a human being, I think his beginnings were very interesting. And to think that he was, just this poor kid that grew up in Maine, with a single mom, and didn't have much, and ended up being this huge best-selling writer, that he has such a gift. And I just think that's really cool. And then of course the writing tips too, because not that I've written anything of any note in a really long time, but back in my teenage years and early college years, I was really into writing. I wanted to be a journalist. I went to school for journalism, so I was really into the writing process, and so this was really interesting to me. I would probably revisit this, honestly. And yeah, it was a 5-star read. I really loved it. I love Stephen King anyway, but this one, being nonfiction and everything, was a little different from what he normally does, but I thought he just did it really, really well. It's a great book. My next one I read in May of 2024, and it's another nonfiction book. I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is Chanel Miller's memoir, and I listened to the audiobook that she also narrated. So I feel like that added like an element to her story, was hearing her tell this story. And this memoir was incredibly powerful. It is about Chanel and her experience being sexually assaulted and how that affected her life, and now not only the act itself, but the way that the criminal justice system handled it, the way that the media handled it, the way that her attacker was, how he was handled in society and in the media and everything, was crazy. And this story was so powerful, and I loved that she was so brave to tell it, because this book is really raw, and it just really shows you how a traumatic event like this can affect a person, especially when this very traumatic event becomes so public. And I just think it was really brave of her to share her story, because there are so many women like Chanel Miller out there who've had something like this happen to them, who have been treated similarly. And yeah, these types of stories need to be told. And so again, like I said when I originally reviewed this book, this might not be for everybody because it could be very triggering for people. But I think it was very powerful, very emotional, and I loved it. Then in June, I read Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, and this book, it's still just like reading my notes that I made about this book brings it all back, and I'm like, yeah, this was just such a great book. I think the first thing about it is it's told through verse, so that kind of gives it some sort of, it makes it different. And then just the whole concept of this book is just so unique, and I just love it. You have this teenage boy who is, in the very beginning of the book, he gets on an elevator from his apartment to go down to, the street level to go after somebody that he wants to get revenge on. And I don't want to give it too many details about why he's doing it or what happened, but and on that elevator ride, which lasts only about a minute, he meets a couple of people that have a huge impact on his life and the decision that he's making. And I just love that, the whole concept of going down a floor, and every time you go down a floor, he meets a different person gets on the elevator. And this was such a good book about grief, about breaking the cycle, because what our main character is planning to do could have serious implications, and that this elevator ride is going to help break that chain of events. And I loved that. I loved the approach to it. This was so emotional, so well written. Jason Reynolds, every book of his I've read has been amazing. And this one is definitely now my favorite of his that I've read. I will read everything this man writes. He's a genius, and this was so powerful, so well done. I absolutely loved this. Okay, the next book that I read, when did I read this? I read this book I finished it in August. So it was like one of those, I started it in July, finished it in August, and it's another coming of age book. So you're starting to see a pattern here of the books that I really tended to enjoy in 2024. I read Caitlin Moran's How to Build a Girl. And this one was interesting because when I first started it, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to continue it. I considered DNFing this book within the first, I don't know, it was probably the first 30 pages or something. I was like, I don't know if I like our main character. I don't know, there's something about her that I'm not sure I'm jiving with, but I decided to stay with it, and I ended up loving this book. I gave it 5 stars. And I liked this because it challenged me in ways that I haven't really been challenged very often in books. When I first started this book, I found myself sort of judging our main character, Johanna. And I realized that I was being too harsh. But then it sort of became where I just got really invested in her. And then I was really concerned for her and worried about her because, you know, I am a grown woman reading this book and she's a teenage girl and she's making decisions that could be very dangerous for her. And so, yeah, I just got really invested in her. I thought that Johanna was very, I loved how she was just very unique and how she sort of found herself throughout the book. And I loved the whole aspect of her being a rock journalist and like doing that as a teenager. I absolutely loved. That's like what I wanted as a teenager. I wanted to write for Rolling Stone magazine. So this teenage girl going around to different venues in England and writing about rock bands was just the dream for me. So I really loved that too. So all in all, this was a great book. And I'm really glad that I ended up, you know, sticking it out and reading it because it ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. Then in August, I also read a book I got from the library that was, the best way I can describe it is it was just a palate cleanser. It was just what I needed in that moment at that time, and it was just perfect for that time. And I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. It was Pink Glass Houses by Asha Elias. And I picked this up because it was giving off Big Little Lies vibes to me, which was another 5-star read that I read a few years back. And because it's centered around this community where all these adults, you know, and their kids, and there's all this drama centered around, you know, things happening at the school and people not getting along and this and that. So there's lots of drama. But I couldn't put it down. I like flew through that book and I ended up really loving it. So is it something that was, you know, really profound or anything like that? No, but it was highly, highly enjoyable. And sometimes that's what you need as a reader. And that's what that book was for me at the time. And that's why I loved it. And then in September, I read a book that actually, this is one of the only horror books. This is the only horror book on my list, which is kind of interesting. But I read We Used to Live Here by Marcus Claiwer. And this was one I picked up because there was a lot of buzz about this book and I fell into it. I got sucked in by the buzz and I was like, I gotta read this book because everybody's saying it's great. And I'm so happy that I ended up feeling the same way because sometimes you read a book that's been really hyped and when you're done reading it, you're like, what was all the hype about? But this, I feel like it was warranted. This book was just so atmospheric and for me, it was a lot about just the vibes it gave off. You spend a huge part of the book just feeling very unsettled and not really knowing why and just wanting answers, but you're not quite getting them. And you're just, I can't explain it. It was just a feeling of just, yeah, being unsettled, being creeped out and not really knowing what's going on. And so for me, yeah, this was clearly just about the vibes. And I think that it's a book that I would love to revisit probably more than once because I know there were things the first go around that I didn't pick up on that I feel like every time I read it, I will probably pick up something else. And that's always fun. So yeah, this was like a mind-bending book. Very similar to I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. It kind of gave me the same feeling. And I had a great time with this. It was great. And then in October, I read another book that I don't have because I got it from the library. It was another one that was very hyped up. And so I decided to pick it up and I ended up loving it. And that was James by Percival Everett. And this book I don't want to say it was a surprise, but I was a little surprised by how much I loved it because it is a retelling of a classic. It's a retelling or reimagining of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And I've read Huckleberry Finn and so I thought, yeah, I liked Huckleberry Finn. So I'll give this book a go. And I do have to say, like I said in my original review, you don't have to read Huckleberry Finn to enjoy James. James is, I think, a story all on its own that you could definitely read and enjoy. And I just loved this book. I loved James, the main character. I loved the writing in here. I loved Percival Everett's approach to language in this book. and speaking. It was just so great. It was a great adventurous kind of story, but it also tackled very heavy themes, and the end of the book was pretty badass, I have to say. And yeah, I loved it. I would love to get my hands on a physical copy so that I could have it from my shelves and possibly revisit in the future. And then the last book that I read in December, so I almost at the end of the year got my last 5-star read of the year, and this is probably in my top 3 for the year. It's one of the most terrifying books I've read this year, and that is Nuclear War by Jacobsen. So I just reviewed this book in December, so I won't repeat myself too much here, but I will just say that, yeah, this book was absolutely terrifying, but I learned a lot from this book, and I think it's a really important read, but it also can cause a lot of anxiety because, like I said in my review, nuclear war is so completely out of our control. I mean, all war essentially is, but with nuclear war, like, I think what makes it so terrifying is once it starts, there's no stopping it. That's it. You're done. It's done. You're done. Everybody's done. And that's really terrifying at how quickly everything can just end. And it's just really scary to think about. It is. And this book just really got me thinking. I found myself, doing sort of outside research about nuclear weapons and things like that, and talking about this book to anybody that would listen. And I just loved this. But again, I'm hesitant to recommend it to people because I know it can be very stressful to read. So I don't want to stress anybody out, but if it sounds interesting, you should definitely pick this up. This was a fantastic book. All right, guys, so those were my favorite reads of 2024. Please let me know down below if you read any of these books and whether they made your favorites list, because I would love to know that. And let me know what your favorite reads of 2024 were, because I would love to know that as well. And I guess that's it. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will chat with you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.